Without further ado, would you all please welcome to the stage Anthony and Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Flanders. It's a pleasure to be here presenting at the OpenStack Australia Day, especially being the first cab off the rank. So there's no excuses for any of you falling asleep, especially those in the front row. I'm watching you, okay? All right, everyone needs to be awake. Alex and I we presented a similar set of live demonstrations over at the summit over in Austin. We're going to be running through pretty much the same set of use cases that we covered off over there, taking you through a live demonstration. For today, that doesn't look too good, does it? The other one's okay? All right, please look at the other one over there. Sorry for these people over here who can't see it. Looks like one's widescreen and the other one's not widescreen. Okay. So we're just debugging this for the rest of the speakers who are coming up here later on, so they can have clear presentations. But we're going to be running through load balancer as a service demo today. We'll be talking through V1 versus V2 and why in this particular case we chose to go V2. We'll also be working through firewall as a service, live example as well, VPN as a service, and today we're going to have to cut our session short because it's not exactly the same amount of time that we had in Austin. So we won't be able to get through the bare metal as a service live demonstration, but we'll do our best to get through as much as we possibly can. All of these use cases were really born because we had a customer come to us probably September last year. And this particular customer came to us and, you know, like it or not, they came to us and said, we've been reading about bimodal IT from Gartner. And we were sort of like, okay, fair enough. Won't hold that against you. And basically, out of that, they wanted to be able to put together a proof of concept with the idea of running these use cases live in production. And I must say, it was really nice for me to see in Austin that the majority of the speakers over there were really concentrating on running production workloads over there. So it was really nice to see that Australia is keeping up with that as well. And the first demonstration that we're going to go through is really our load balancer as a service demonstration. This one involves autoscaling. It is running on LBaaS v2. So it is an LBaaS v2 demonstration. And this particular customer, they wanted to be able to take advantage of LBaaS v2, and they did have maturity and understanding of the V1 integration with Kubernetes and some of the challenges around that. We'll talk more about that in a moment, and we'll talk more about the Manaska integrations and things like that that's coming. But with that in mind, I think what we'll do is we'll probably, for the sake of time, we'll flick across. We'll get the first live demo out of the way, and then we'll talk about some of the advantages, disadvantages, and traps to watch out for when you're going with V2. So I'll bring Alex up onto the stage. We'll flick across the live demo. Looks like it's not too bad there.
Hello, everyone. So for this particular customer, we basically run this POC, and what they wanted to do was basically to deploy a full SDN, a full-fledged SDN. So initially we thought, look, let's bring New Ash into the picture. We brought Martin, he's sitting here in front, and we spent 2 very long nights basically trying to integrate the DCN with Helion OpenStack and all the playbooks. We finally got it running. Sadly, at the end, there was not enough budget to basically continue with the full POC, so we have to figure out a way to basically delivering all the items that we need to fulfill in the POC without New Ash. So we try our best, and the demos that we have today are basically based in pure Neutron, all right? So the very first one that we're going to run, load balancer as a service, in this case, the distro that we use is Helion OpenStack, obviously, and by default, we actually use LBaaS version 2, all right? And there are some limitations that we will explain in a moment on the challenges that you may face when you use LBaaS version 2, but let me get this one running first because it will take about 3 minutes. Okay, so everything that we're doing here is based on infrastructure as a code, all right? We are not going to do anything from Horizon. Everything is running as code, either using scripts or using Ansible playbooks. So what we can see from here is that basically we are going to have some networks standing up. We are going to have a demilitarized zone and a database network as well. And we are going to bring a virtual router into the picture, configure 2 Tomcat servers. These are real Tomcat servers. And the backend is actually running on Oracle Express Edition, okay? So what we did is basically we put a load balancer in front, and we configure the Tomcat servers as members of this load balancer. All right, the whole infrastructure takes about 3 minutes to stand up. If we take a look at the Nova components, we should be able to see one database server coming up and 2 web servers. And what I will do while this one stands up is talk a little bit about the limitations that we face. So basically, with LBaaS version 2, there is no Horizon integration at the moment. All right, that one is something that is supposed to happen in Mitaka. So hopefully, for those of you that are starting to engage with the Mitaka cycle, you should be able to use LBaaS from Horizon. Since we don't have Horizon integration, there is also no heat integration, which makes quite a challenging to configure scalability groups. So basically, scalability groups, for those of you who are not familiar, is the ability to create alarms and define thresholds, in this case CPU thresholds, so that when the load starts hitting your web farm, basically we can define that at 80%, we're going to stand up a new Tomcat server and we're going to put it as a member of the load balancer, and basically we can take more load coming in. So these thresholds are not possible to do today with LBaaS version 2 because of the lack of integration with heat. And of course, the scaling down was also not possible. So the way that we actually bypass this, we use Monasca. We use something called monitoring as a service, a scale, which is actually included as part of the distribution. So what we can do with Monasca is define our own set of alarms for the workloads that you have running in the infrastructure. And once that we hit the threshold, Monasca is actually going to trigger the scripts that we have running in the controllers, and the scripts are going to do the auto-scaling. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, the second challenge that we have with LBaaS version 2, which we used to have it as well in version 1, is that basically there is no HA capabilities. So for those of you familiar, LBaaS still runs as a kernel namespace, all right? So basically, if the LBaaS service is running in the network controller or in the compute node, in case that you are using DVR, and that particular compute node dies, then your load balancer is gone as well, all right? It dies with the namespace. There is no failover. So this one is going to be addressed actually in our next release, which is based on Liberty, and we are bringing Octavia into the picture. So with Octavia, what we do is basically we define amphoras. Amphoras are virtual machines that we can stand up, and the virtual machine is actually running the load balancer. So we can basically bring several amphoras running on different compute nodes, and all of them can be accessed using the same IP, what we call the floating IP, right? In case that one of the amphoras dies, then you can still basically HA from the other ones, the remaining ones. Okay, so this is going to happen in the next release, host 3.0, which is actually being released this week, and it's based on Liberty. As you know, the enterprise distros are most of the time 3 months away of upstream. In this case, 6 months, but it's coming this week. Let's take a look at the demo. I think the infrastructure should be up by now. Okay, everything is up. So if we take a look from here, we should be able to see the floating IP that we defined for the load balancer. So what I will do is, let me just open another browser here, and let's try to point that floating IP to our port 8080, which is our Tomcat. And we should be able to see actually our web server running here, okay? So LBaaS is working in round-robin fashion. Just now we saw the load going to Web 2, Web 1. We refresh, goes to Web 2, and the database is actually loaded on the left-hand side, all right? So basically this one is a media company providing movies and this kind of stuff. So an easier way to test the load is actually to just call the floating IP for the load balancer. We have a script here to do that. And we should be able to see the reply whether it's going to Web 1 or Web 2. All right, let's try to simulate some load now in the web farm. Let's see what happens if we actually increase the CPU utilization. All right, sorry about that. So once we trigger the scale-up script, so basically we should be able to see that there is a new web server coming into the farm, and it's going to be added as member of the load balancer. Right, so this one is perhaps going to take about a minute. So what we will do is, after this, we're going to test the load again, and basically we should be able to see that the load is spread across the three load balancers. All right, as I mentioned before, from Horizon you cannot really see LBaaS, so we can see firewall, we can see VPN, which are the next two use cases that we're going to showcase, but there is no LBaaS. And again, this is because of the lack of integration with version 2. Right, I think that the server is almost there, is adding into the load balancer now. So I think that we can start touching a bit into firewall as a service, Anthony, while this one gets going.
Yep. So let's let's jump out of the slides and just go back to Horizon because we're running out of time. We've only got about 10 minutes left to go because we started late. So let's show everyone the firewall as a service from Horizon. Talk that one through. No, because we're going to run out of time otherwise. We'll show that we've got nothing up our sleeves, and then we'll talk about deploying firewall as a service as well.
Okay, for firewall as a service, basically one of the limitations that we have with LBaaS is that we cannot really use security groups to block ICMP requests, because at this moment, LBaaS is just running as a namespace, right? It's not really a proper virtual machine. So in this particular customer, what they wanted to achieve is basically block all the ICMP traffic to try to avoid any kind of DOS attacks. And the way that we did it was basically by configure the firewall from OpenStack. All right, at the moment we don't have any firewall configured, so what I will do is basically stand it up with code again. Before we do that,
let's just check that.
Yeah, our load balancer should be already with 3 web servers, so we can see web 2, web 1, and scale web. All right, so the scaling is actually working. So let's try to bring the firewall.
So obviously it's not an ideal situation to be able to ping obviously your web servers and things like that. It's very, very bad practice. So by bringing this in, we should basically be blocking that as well. So as Alex will test now.
Yeah. Okay, let's check the policies again. Basically what I did is create an ICMP rule denying. Okay, we are still allowing traffic to 8080. We created a policy, basically adding these 2 rules, and we created a firewall, a virtual firewall in OpenStack, and we put the policies in place. All right, so let's take a look at our floating IP. 10.10.202.39. Let's try to ping it. And we shouldn't be able to reach it. All right. So the ICMP is actually blocked. Again, by code, we can actually get rid of the firewall.
So the customer at hand was actually adding this into their continuous integration rig. So they were basically able to control small policy firewall rule changes and in their lower environments. They were actually using Jenkins in this particular case, but it was able to trigger these types of scripts and be able to control their firewalls.
That's right. So this is firewall as a service. And the very last use case, which is perhaps the coolest one that we have today, is what we call VPN as a service. And for that one, I think that I will let Anthony explain a bit the background from the customer.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left.
We have 10 actually.
Got 10?
Yep.
Cool. So what the customer was basically looking to be What the customer was basically looking to be able to achieve out of this one was they had a number of disparate legacy systems of record and things like that they wanted to be able to bring in and to be able to expose 2 to their public cloud, to their public cloud environment, but also their private cloud environment, and they want to be able to tie the two of them together. So the only way to be able to do things like that was to be able to connect it up securely. So they wanted to be able to proof of concept a VPN as a service, basically, so they could back-end service their Oracle databases and their systems of record. So what they were trying to do literally was to tie those in so that they can expose that as a service or be able to create disparate services of record to be able to show through and abstract that out into their web farms and into their web servers. And so this small proof of concept allowed them to be able to have a way to be able to join those clouds together to be able to do this. So what Alex is going to show now is he's going to basically kick off an environment which has site A, which is representing a private cloud, and site B, which is representing a public cloud. In this particular case, yeah, they're both OpenStack individual clouds in their own right. And then what he'll do is he'll create the secure interface between the two of them. So we'll do the demonstration, but then we'll also talk about a couple of challenges that you need to be really aware of, especially some of the security risks around OpenSwan. So we'll call them out afterwards. But what we'll probably do is we'll run the demo first, show you how it works, and then we'll talk about some of the issues that you need to be aware of and that you may need to secure to actually make it work for you.
So what I will do is let me log in as a different tenant. I'm going to use my VPN tenant. And just to give you a bit more of a ground, this POC was actually run in January. And at that time, we still had our HPE public cloud, which was based in OpenStack. So what we did is actually we got the customer to run their web farm in the public cloud while the database was sitting on-premise. So all the data was actually inside the data center, right? And what we did is configure a tunnel, a secure tunnel between the public cloud and the private cloud to get the communication going between the web layer and the database, right? So let me log in as VPN admin. And on this cloud, we should have the database server, if I remember correctly. There is nothing but the database, okay? So this one is actually our private cloud. And for the demo, we're actually using two different private clouds. Sadly, we don't have our public cloud anymore, but this will work just fine as well. And from here, what I will do is let me take note of the floating IP that we are using for this particular web server. We are only running a single Tomcat server here to keep it simple. And the floating IP should be this one. So again, if we point to port 8080, we should be able to get the website. But we are going to hit some JSP errors on this site eventually.
Hang on a second.
What is it?
Can't see it on the screen, that's all.
Yeah. Okay, so basically we cannot get anything from the database because there is just no communication between the two clouds. So let me go back to this particular tenant, the one running the web services, and if we take a look at the network tab under the VPN, we should see that there is no IPsec connectivity, okay? There is nothing inside there. So again, by using code, we are going to enable the VPN across the two clouds.
All right, we only got 1 minute. So essentially, as soon as this thing joins up, in theory, within a minute, we should be able to get our web servers to talk to the database server, and then all
That's
three.
right. So guys, this is the error I was talking about, okay? It's a JSP error, and basically it's telling me that it cannot find the listener sitting on the other side. I cannot communicate with my private cloud. Okay, let's take a look at the horizon very quickly. We're almost done here. And we should be able to see now that we have IPsec connectivity. All right, so once we have the connectivity, hopefully if I refresh, we should be able to hit the database as well, all right?
Database is there. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Absolutely amazing. Another big round of applause for the demo here. Never easy to do the demo.
3.